We're going up and down, over and over, over and over. It's the same old thing. Up and down, over and under.
Coach Boyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I love doing these.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've done a lot of them. We were just catching up about that. A savvy vet. So thank you for making the time to do this one as well.
Not a problem. I'm trying to do one a week just because I get a lot of people asking, and it's become a really good way to keep tapping into kind of new audiences, people that haven't maybe, aren't familiar with what we do and haven't really, heard of us. One thing you realize that, you think you're making an impact, and then you realize there's freaking billions of people in the world who have no clue who you are. So.
Well, and that's one of the amazing things that I've found about this podcast. So, I'm actually coming up on a year of doing it, and not that I had like a small vision for it, but I didn't anticipate how global it could be. And so to your point, there's billions of people, and there's people in every country who for whatever reason may not have been exposed to your work. So I'm completely with you, man. The more opportunities that you can take to kind of get your message out there, the more opportunities you have to make an impact on someone's life.
Yeah. It's amazing. Because my last book, I think, is in about 9 languages now. And one day I said, I started thinking, well, gee, it's in English and it's in Spanish. That must hit, 80% of the world.
Right.
So I just kind of Googled most spoken languages, and I realized that Hindi is the number 1 spoken language. And so
isn't that amazing?
Yeah. If you're not in Hindi, you're not hitting the largest percentage of whatever listening, viewing. And obviously people could make a case for, what are the economic factors that go into that. But it's just crazy that's that's first. And I think Mandarin Chinese, which my book is in, is second. But cool. I think I figured out that I had only basically developed the ability to communicate with about 40% of the world by being in 9 languages.
That's incredible. Well, yeah, and it's kind of it's very easy to get focused first on like the U.S., right? At least you had it in Spanish and English, and now you've moved on to 9 languages. But it's like, look, if your goal is to help people, there are so many people, and it's like you got to then figure out a way to like, how can you make it accessible?
Right. And that's
so actually, let me ask you.
Good. Podcast,
go ahead, please.
Podcast, Instagram. I would say half my Instagram followers are not in the United States, and I have about 110,000 Instagram followers. And you just realize that. It's amazing. I communicate regularly with a rugby guy in Sri Lanka. And would I have communicated regularly with a rugby guy in Sri Lanka in the pre-internet world? No, there's no chance.
Right. Yeah. You would have been like parchment and long form mail and weeks between communications. Yeah, man, it's incredible. I love it. Well, and to your point, I'm excited to share, granted we only have an hour, so it'll be a snippet of kind of what you do, but just introducing people to the idea and concept of functional training, and maybe that's a great place to start. In your own words, would you mind describing what functional training means to you?
Yeah, I've gotten very good at this. Functional training is training that makes sense. It is the opposite of dysfunctional training. So when you think about most of the training that we do, is really dysfunctional. We spend a tremendous amount of time training on 2 feet, although almost nothing that occurs in sports occurs on 2 feet. So a lot of training by nature is dysfunctional. And we started looking at this and saying, hey, I always say, I use the example, rowing is really the only sport that is consistently competed at 100% of the time with 2 feet in contact with, quote unquote ground, not even the ground, but really, the foot plate kind of in the boat. Other than that, everything else is one leg at a time. So and the other thing we talk about is functional training is training muscles according to their function. It's the understanding of functional anatomy. So much of what we do is just dysfunctional stuff that everybody else did. And we just keep repeating, well, this is how everybody always did it. So we're just going to keep doing it that way.
Yeah. And, you said something too. I had a lot of fun going back and reading your book again. And there's a question that kind of needs to be asked, whether it's a movement, an exercise. It's like, hey, are we improving strength or are we improving performance? And it's, I admittedly looking back and even today, it's very easy to get caught up in that desire to improve strength, add more weight, break through a PR, right? Even if you're doing it at the expense of proper form and function. So just like looking at things through that lens even kind of helps me when I'm assessing, like I'm no longer a competitive athlete, but I have a bunch of goals that I've set for myself. Looking at it through that lens even helps me kind of stay oriented towards my task.
Yeah, because ultimately when you look at, particularly, this is called the Professional Athlete Podcast. If you're training a professional athlete, they've generally already become professional prior to meeting you. That would be, there are a few of us, and I will say I am in that minority of strength coaches who've trained people from the time they were young until they became professionals and then throughout their professional career. There's a couple of guys that have done that, but not a lot. And so one of the things you have to realize when you train professional athletes is somehow, some way they got here without you. And you have to understand that part. And then you have to look at it and think, we in the strength world have like a fascination with strength sports, with Olympic lifting, with powerlifting, with bodybuilding. But the reality is those are their own pursuits. They're not the pursuit of the professional athlete that you're training. That person might want to be better at baseball or better at hockey or better at basketball, whatever that is. And then you have to figure out, what can I take out of those other disciplines that may help this person become better at their sport. And I mean, that's the kind of essence of the job.
Yeah. Well, and let me ask you this, because you mentioned it already, bilateral versus unilateral movement. I don't know if you were the first to really bring this into the consciousness of the strength and conditioning community, but certainly I think unilateral movement is often associated with the programming that people at least perceive you to do. Can you kind of talk about the difference between the two a little bit, and if one is more beneficial as we think about functional training or training for sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you really look at it, bilateral training is really dysfunctional. Neurologically, my feeling is the body doesn't like bilateral training. And I use the example. So if you asked somebody to jump as far as they could, let's use standing, kind of a standing long jump. People are going to run and jump off one leg, right? You'll never see you never see a guy say, oh, he held the world record in the triple jump and he hopped the whole, or he double leg jumped the entire time. Our body is designed in this spiral, diagonal, beautiful neurological way. And then what we do is we make it dumber and dumber and dumber by hammering it with bilateral exercise. And if you look at this, and I'm an ex-powerlifter, so I can say it, but I would not.
You're an ex-what?
An ex-powerlifter. I competed in powerlifting, as a young man in my 20s. But I think if you go to a powerlifting meet, I could politely say you are not impressed by the athleticism of the participants. You don't look at the guys or the women and think, wow, I bet that guy's really good at basketball. Wow, I bet that guy, is a really, really good baseball pitcher. No, you look at those people and think they're very, very good at lifting weights with 2 feet touching the ground. And what you realize is if that had the performance enhancing properties that we sort of attribute to it, a lot more of those people would be in the Olympics and other sports. They wouldn't be, off on some Saturday afternoon competing against other like-minded individuals. They would be at the Olympics, or they would be in the NBA, or they would be in the NFL, and they're not. And what we realize is that this sort of, we've gone into this blind pursuit. More is like, it's the American way, right? More is better. If running a mile is good, running 2 miles is much better, and running a marathon is way better than that. And that's just not reality. So when we start looking at this like bilateral versus unilateral, I mean, to me, the debate, you like look and go, okay, just put the TV on, watch every game. What are they doing? Are they not moving unilaterally? And most of the best players move unilaterally really, really fast. So when you start looking at that, you think, wow, if I could develop training techniques that help people move unilaterally really fast, that would probably be performance enhancing for what I'm watching on television right now. I mean, it is so common sense, but we have a lot of people who are very wrapped up in their own belief system. See, the difference for me is I'm not wrapped up in a belief system. I'm wrapped up that my belief system is I want to make my athletes the best I possibly can be. And that has led me to investigate lots of things and not become fascinated with some sort of simplistic thing. So
there certainly seems to be some folks who take like a dogmatic approach, and like you said, it's like, hey, this is the way we've always done it. And also, on powerlifting, because look, I also, I love watching it, I love doing it, and there's a place for it, right? But I think kind of what you're saying is like you need to be really honest about what you're training for. If you're training to be a better powerlifter, I would assume that you would say, well, then go for it, right? Because those exercises are specific to that sport. But if you have another pursuit, football, basketball, baseball, field, whatever it is, to your point, just watch what's happening, and clearly unilateral, single leg, is like the driving force behind who's successful.
Right. I mean, and that's, so to me, it's, we talk about, functional training is training that makes sense. Functional training is just using your common sense. So much of it to me, and it's, as you said, but to be able to step away from the dogma, to be able to step back from what you've always, what you've believed. This is what I think. This is what I was taught. This is what my high school coach told me. This is what my college coach told me. But to be able to sit there and question that, to look at that and say, wow, is that really true? And I think that applies in a lot of areas of life. But, when we look at that, we have to think, wow, is that really the best way to do that? And I did that a long time ago, 30 years ago. I had some of these epiphanies at seminars, listening to people and thinking, wow, are we doing the right thing here? And if we're not, should I be doing something different? And that led me to experiment. And the experiments led me to kind of, at least in my mind, verify that what we were doing was working, because suddenly we're getting people better and healthier. We're not, because again, the crazy pursuit of like the big squat, the big deadlift, the big bench press generally leaves like this orthopedic wreck in its, or trail, right? Where, people's got, bad back, bad shoulders, whatever it is. And they're constantly trying to work around these things in the consistent pursuit of, 5 more pounds in a lift, 10 more pounds in a lift. And you look at that and think, like, for my guys, and I should be my guys or my girls, because we have a lot of women's national team players that we train. The truth is they don't care about that. Yeah. That's not important to them. What's important to them is being the world's best at their particular activity.
Yeah. What are you looking for in when you consider adding a movement or an exercise, to your programming? Like what like sort of traits are you looking for that movement might be able to deliver to the athletes?
I look for something that's better than what we're doing right now. I think that's the thing that I really look at. So I'm always trying to figure out, okay, who's the best in the world at whatever it is they do? I'll give you, Stuart McGill's a really good example. So if Stuart McGill is the leading expert on helping people with low back pain, then I should probably listen to Stuart McGill when he talks about low back pain. I should probably look at the exercises.
Sounds like I need to. Yeah.
But look at the exercises that he says are important. Look at the things that he says, here's kind of my to-do list. Here's my not to-do list. Here are my recommendations. And I think that's all you really need to do. And as you begin to do that, what happens in our field is that people think, oh yeah, I listen to him and he doesn't agree with me, so therefore he's an idiot. And you're kind of like, I mean, that's basically how most strength and conditioning people evaluate things. They listen to people, they seek agreement or affirmation that they're correct.
Yeah.
And then if they're not, well, I'll begin to argue with this person on the internet and I'll tell everybody how much I dislike them because they don't think like me. And that's like Mike Boyle's life. there's the Mike Boyle acceptors and there are the Mike Boyle detractors. And, they could be equal groups. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I don't really care because my job is to attempt to educate, but it's not to try to sway the people that don't want to agree with me. It's only to sort of, hey, I want to draw in the like-minded people who understand and what I would consider the intelligent people. But that's just me.
Yeah. So what are you using to measure whether a new, not to oversimplify, an exercise or an approach or some means of training, what are you using to measure and determine if that's going to stay in your programming moving forward? Like what sorts of things are you looking at?
There's a bunch of things you're looking at. One, like I always say there's two ways to look at an exercise. An athlete looks at you and says, this exercise sucks. And then you have to look at it and think, well, does he think it sucks because it's really hard to do? Or does he think it sucks because it's a waste of time? I need to delineate which of those two it is and be able to look at that. So what I'm really looking at is I think athletes are super intuitive and really smart. And that's one of the things that I realized when I kind of rejected the bilateral back squat idea. I can't tell you how many professional athletes said to me, oh, that's awesome. You're never going to make me put 500 pounds on my back again. And I was like, nope, never. And they were literally like, oh man, high five. You're the best, and what you realize is that there weren't, and the people who were mad tended to be the grunts, right? The offensive linemen, those types of guys were like, oh, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. But all the really high skilled people thought, wow, I always hated that to begin with. It never felt good. It always made my back sore. I never felt good the next day. You know what I mean? And I started to realize, okay, there's clearly some affirmation here from the gifted athletes that I'm working with that this is a positive direction. But then you also have to look at it in terms of, like, I like to analyze injury rates. I mean, in training, I want an injury rate of 0. So I don't want anybody to ever get hurt training. If somebody gets hurt training, to me, that's disastrous, right? And then I want to look at people when they go to their season. What's their incidence, say, of non-contact injury? I always said that, contact injury to some degree, you're not going to be able to prevent that from happening. But non-contact injury, the kind of muscle pulls, the low back pain, those types of things should,
the ACLs,
should be decreased. And what we found is that our sort of emphasis on functional training, one was our, like I said, ACL. We did 1 year, well, not 1 year, 1 6-year period. We did 6 years where we were involved in women's professional soccer. We didn't have one ACL. 6 years.
Really? And,
of women's professional soccer.
And the female.
Oh, yeah. The stats.
The female athletic population.
The average there should have been based on, let's say we were working with a team of 25 women. Even if you said 2 women, we should have had somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 ACLs, and we had 0. And we continue to. I mean, it's not that no one has ever torn an ACL that works with us, but it is not something that we see with great frequency. We were talking about this the other day. We don't see a lot of hamstring strains. We don't have a lot of hip surgeries. We don't have a lot of back pain. And people, but the big kind of drag on me is, he's afraid, he doesn't want to do things that are difficult. And I'm like, particularly in the professional athlete world, absolutely. Am I afraid? Yes. Do I not want to do things that I consider to be high risk? Yes. Because the first year I went and worked for the Red Sox, one of the things that I said to every guy that I talked to was like, hey, you got here without me. You're here. Like, you're playing Major League Baseball. You're one of an elite group of people. How can I help you?
Yeah.
Not me saying, oh, yeah, I know the way to train and I'm going to tell you what to do. Because, again, the average professional athlete is going to reject that premise. They're going to look and be like, who's this like bald little old man who's all of a sudden going to tell me how I'm going to do it, right? And I saw a bunch of people like in professional sports, there are guys who get fired all the time because they come in and think, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to tell everybody how to train because I'm the world's biggest genius of training. And a lot of the players just look and go like, whatever. Yeah. Sorry. Got here without you. Don't really have much interest in your ideas.
Right. I'm hitting 300 as is.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not like, you don't strike me as a team player, like a guy who wants to help me get better. You're telling me that I don't know what I'm doing. And I want to look at you and think, I know what I'm doing. I had guys who used to be like, I make $10 million. I know what I'm doing. And I was kind of like, I can't really argue with that. If you make $10 million in Major League Baseball, you're obviously doing something right. So I wanted to focus, like I said, and the guys were incredibly receptive to what I wanted them to do because I didn't force it on them. I had guys, I actually started when I first went, all I really did was work. I almost personal trained all the injured guys. We had a whole bunch of guys from the year before. We had 11 disabled list players who had had surgery the year before. And I just kind of threw myself into these 11 guys. I'm going to train these 11 guys. I'm going to help with their rehab. When they get done in the training room, I'm going to take them and do what I think I need to do to help them to get back to play. Within about a month of that, I had rostered players coming to me and saying, why are these guys getting all the attention? Why don't you make time for us? And I was like, okay, that means I've just done my job because the rostered guys have taken notice.
You struck a chord.
Yep. And but it was initially just, hey, here's where I think I can do the most good. And the interesting thing, the next year, we started the next year with 0 guys on the disabled list. We had no one have surgery after the season was over, and we won the world championship the next year. I believe there is a strong correlate. Oh, wow. Yeah, there's a strong correlate, and not to me or my work, but to healthy players. They always talk about in professional.
You can't win a game if you're not on the field.
Right. The number one ability is availability. Like you're going to win. I always say to people, what are the chances of the Lakers winning if LeBron's not playing? They drop way down, right? Brady doesn't play in the Super Bowl. What's the chances of Tampa Bay winning? They drop way down. Mahomes loses 2 offensive linemen, in the last couple of weeks leading up to the Super Bowl. What are the chances of Kansas City winning the Super Bowl? They go way down. When your best players are no longer available. So our focus should really be on availability first. At least that's my mind.
So what's going on in the body physiologically when you're training guys unilaterally? And you put a ton of content out online. So, I'll encourage people to go to YouTube, and I'll link to your book to see a lot of the exercises that you're doing. But, okay, so I totally follow you. Hey, sport is not done bilaterally, almost exclusively, right? So understanding that like the way that we perform sport, unilateral is really critical. But when you're training guys in that way, like what is actually happening that's helping them perform better or reduce the risk of injury?
Well, I mean, one, you're training, if you think about functional anatomy, you're training the right muscles. If I put 2 feet on the floor, all of the muscles of my hips and my core do not have to do the same thing that they do when 1 foot is on the floor. So this is the sort of incredible common sense argument that I like to make for people. I put you on the floor and I say, take your right foot off the floor, stand on your left foot. I have now asked your adductors to stabilize your pelvis. I've now asked your glute medius to stabilize your pelvis. I've now asked your quadratus lumborum to stabilize your pelvis. I've asked all of the muscles probably, from below your pecs to your knees to perform a different function than they were performing when we were doing bilateral exercise. And we now have a neurological specificity that relates really strongly to what we're going to do on the field. And that's what I mean about common sense. I look at that and I say to people, okay, argue that premise with me on this same scientific basis on which I am arguing it with you. Don't argue it with me on, squat's the king of all lifts. You got to do it to get strong. I'm like, that's a freaking half-ass bullshit argument, right? But that's generally most of the people that I argue with default back to, it's good enough for me when I played, or, some other sort of moronic kind of approach versus, no, wait a second. Let's have an anatomical discussion.
Let's objectively assess this.
As far as what's happening. And so I guess that's what we're looking at. Then you get into the idea that there's a concept that they call bilateral deficit. And this is really like the clincher of the unilateral versus bilateral debate. So bilateral deficit basically says that in the easiest way to, are we using video or are we using just audio when this goes out?
Yeah, using video too. Yeah.
Video too. So imagine I'll use my hands as examples because it's really easy. If I gave you a hand grip dynamometer and said, squeeze it as hard as you could with 2 hands, you would get a score, a grip strength score. Let's just say that grip strength score is 100 to make the numbers really easy. If I then gave you the same dynamometer and said, squeeze it in your right hand, then squeeze it in your left hand. And I added right plus left together. Right plus left would be greater than right and left combined. That is indicative of bilateral deficit. If we did that, you can do that in lots of exercises. And again, I'm not a leg extension fan. We don't do leg extensions, but leg extension is a really easy example. If I had somebody do a 2-leg leg extension for a max, some sort of max, let's say a 10 rep max, then I had them do right leg and left leg, the addition of right leg, left leg would be greater than the 2 legs. If I measured your vertical jump off of 2 legs, and then I had you do a single leg right and a single leg left, the combination of right and left would again be greater. And what this is it to some people's mind, it's neurological proof that the body is inefficient when you ask it to act bilaterally. Because think about this again from a neurological standpoint. You're asking your brain to send impulses to both sides of the body saying, do the same thing. But when you ask that
at the exact same time,
right, and when you ask the body to do something in a sports skill sense, it's like, okay, throw a baseball. You don't give somebody 2 baseballs and say, if you gave somebody 2 baseballs and said, try to throw them both, you'd see a really inefficient baseball throw, right? Even think of asking somebody to go to throw left-handed. Think about neurologically how driven we are. Most people can't throw at all with their left hand, right? Because there's a clear hemispherical nature to the brain, which gives you a certain side dominance. And we know that all this occurs, but in training, we reject the idea, even though the data is there. Anybody can look up. I have people say, well, with bilateral deficit, if you train really hard with 2 legs, you can probably equal it out. And my thing is,
you can close the gap a little bit.
I'm like, you don't want to close the gap. That closing the gap is idiotic. It's like saying I'm inefficient, but I want to make myself as inefficient as I possibly can, right? And so we saw
for the sake of proving my point.
Right. We saw this with unilateral, any of the unilateral squat type variations that we did. People very, very quickly got way stronger in these unilateral activities than we expected them to get. And it was almost like I was doing it from a specificity standpoint, from a sports standpoint, from an injury prevention standpoint. But what I realized from a pure performance standpoint, it was better. I had a friend last night send me a video of his baseball players doing step back lunges. Now, these are, not supermen, but they're doing step back lunges with 315 pounds. These are not guys who could squat. They couldn't squat or RDL or deadlift or whatever, 630 pounds. I am very certain of that. I've seen hockey players do 500 pounds in a 1-leg squat. 500 pounds, like easy, like breaking sticks. The guy's not a 1,000-pound squatter. So, all right, go ahead. I could go on forever. I'll let you.
No, what's interesting too. No, I love it. This is great. No, but I was just going to say, I played college football, and looking back now and rereading your book again, I have to imagine it influenced a good deal of what we did, because we did do a lot of single leg squats, split squats, things of that nature. And I'm one of those guys. I'm taller. I'm like 6'3". At the time, I was probably like 230. So I would have lower back pain, right? And I just was like, well, it's just, I don't know, it kind of is what it is. But to your point, what I found is like when we did like our single leg squats, or, whatever it's called, the rear foot elevated single leg squat with like a barbell, not only could I do much more on a single leg, and this might have been like indicative of some sort of, dysfunction I had with my regular squat, but I could do substantially more with a single leg squat. And I always thought that was so interesting. And to your point, like the amount, not to beat my chest, but the amount of weight I could do was like very surprising, because it was nowhere near, if you were to add the two together, reflective of what I would be able to do with 2 legs.
Right.
So reading the book, it makes sense logically, but I can also kind of attest to just my own experience, just how true that actually is.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think, like you said, you're 6'3", the taller somebody is, like one of the things, I wrote an article on rowing one time, and one of the things that I said is, what makes you a really good rower makes you a really shitty weightlifter. The taller you are, the worse weightlifter you'll be. Because it's leverage. Again, it's like anatomy. This is physics, right? It's about lever arms. I always said, the guys that encourage you to squat, the guys that are like huge squat proponents, do you know what they look like? Squatty. That would be their description of them, right? They're squatty. They're
Muscle
short,
hamsters.
right? They're short. They're muscular. They have really exceptional leverage, which allows them to be really good at weightlifting type tasks. You very rarely see like a 6'8" basketball player espousing how much he loves back squatting. You know, I love back squatting. I love deadlifting. No, you don't see it. You know, there are some, maybe you could find one or two, but in general, because the other thing you find in strength training, right? The disc is a constant. So if we're going to lift weights off the floor, the person who has the highest probability of lifting a weight off the floor, a heavy weight, is the shortest person, probably who has the greatest amount of mass per inch. So, you know, your best power lifters are going to be short and stocky, particularly your best deadlifters, because that plate is 18 inches. And it's a lot easier for a guy who's 5'8" to get 18 inches off the floor than it is, or actually, you know, well, 9.5 inches, really, if you're thinking where the center is, than a guy who's 6'8". Right? I mean, and this is all the like
travels a lot less.
Yeah. Like I go to seminars all the time and I sort of espouse all of this common sense stuff for people. Like, here, look at this. You know, here's the diameter of a disc. That's why we don't clean from the floor. You know, and people are like, you have to clean from the floor. I'm like, no, you don't have to clean from the floor. I said, you've obviously never trained like elite rowers or NBA players or, you know, big left tackles in the NFL. They're all going to be shitty at cleaning from the floor. They're also going to be lousy back squatters. You know, they're going to be, and I could tell you this historically, you know, because again, tall people tend to have a lot more length within their femur than their tibia. It's what makes them tall. I have a great video or a great picture that I show of
interesting.
One of my interns and one of my athletes. The intern is 4'11", the athlete is 5'11". Seated, they are identical in height. Their spines are the same length.
Oh, wow.
But you can literally see,
That's
so the
wild.
one girl, so if you look at Sydney, who you see in the picture, you see that her knees are about 4 inches above the knees of the other girl. And you realize that her tibia is at least 3 inches longer and her femur is about 8 inches longer. And that accounts for the 11 inches or 12 inches different in their height. It's not in their spine.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's just all of these things.
Crazy.
I mean, there's so much evidence out there. But the problem is our field is so dogmatic that people don't want it. Well, people, I would say again, the Mike Boyle people are very ready to accept the evidence. The other people, you know, the powerlifting people, the Olympic lifting people, they just want, you know, they're the science deniers. They don't want this to be true. It's not true. In spite of the fact that you're talking to me about the nervous system and you're talking to me about functional anatomy and you're talking to me about all these things that make perfect sense. It's like, you know, like little kids, la, 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 I can't hear you. And that's how they are. Like they don't want to hear because then they become less significant. The things that are important to them become less important.
Yeah. Well, and actually, you know, I had another question, but maybe this is even more relevant because, right, you did create a second iteration of your book. You know, so one, like I said, I enjoyed reading. I think you even do a good job of saying, look, I put this in 10, 15 years ago. I no longer agree with what I wrote then based on what I've learned in the time between. So like for you, you know, what was kind of why was there a need to write the second version of functional training?
Because the first one was terrible. It was written in 2004. It's actually a funny story. So Ted Miller, Ted's a editor for Human Kinetics, and he grabbed me at a seminar and said, I really think you should write a second edition of the book. Now, one thing that you'll realize if you ever write a book is that you don't ever read your own book, right? Like I don't read my own book every year and say, hey, how relevant is my own book? And my literal response to Ted was, Ted, the book is fine. It still sells. You know, I sell 4,000 or 5,000 copies every year. What, you know, and he said, all he said was, I'd like you to review the book. And if you feel it doesn't need revision, that'll be the end of the conversation. So I went and I reviewed the book and I sent him an email and I was like, Ted, this book sucks. Who wrote this? You know, it's like, and that led to, okay, here's the rewrite because and this is the thing I say to people all the time. That was if in 16 years, or actually, I think it was 10 or 12 from the original writing to the new one coming out. I think it was 2016, the new one came out. But if you haven't learned enough to make your own book no longer relevant, then you probably weren't working during that time.
What?
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
Because I looked at things, there were things I said I didn't even mention foam rolling in the first book. And if someone said to me, first thing you should do if you're going to work out, I'm like, foam roll. First thing, foam roll. In the first book, I said, don't static stretch because it's been shown to reduce power. I since realized that that was not true, and that research was at best questionable and in reality probably completely wrong. So the first two things that we do at a workout, I said not to do. In the first book, I was like, we didn't even mention foam rolling, and I said don't stretch. Now the first thing I tell you to do is foam roll. Second thing I tell you to do is stretch. There was a lot of still bilateral training talk in there. There was a lot of talk about front squatting, and there was, in that time, because it was functional training, there was a little bit of talk about unbalanced, unstable surface stuff. And there was a lot of unilateral in there, but not nearly as much as there probably should have been. So, I think I always say to anybody, any book that you read is out of date. Because by the time you get the book in your hands, that author has had some change as to how they feel about something that's in that book.
I love that. Well, and, I'd be interested to hear from your perspective because we have talked a lot about not being married to a philosophy or an ideology, right? Following the science. For you specifically, because you are a very well-regarded expert in the space, like where are you turning for education and like kind of continued learning?
Twitter. That's where everybody goes.
Oh, hey, here we go.
Yeah. and that's a half joke. But the reality is, a well-curated Twitter feed is going to be a wealth of information because you'll get constant updates on research, on science, on whatever it is. So I can look at my Twitter feed in the morning and find out what all the smart people that I know are thinking. And that's a really good thing. And the other thing is you create a network of smart people. I'm at the point in my career where I know most of the good people in my field, or who I think the good people are. So, and I keep tabs on those people. What are they thinking? What's their direction right now? What are they into? What are they finding interesting? What are they reading? Are they having thoughts that are changing about training? These are all things that you should be doing. Anybody, and I don't care what business you're in, you should be doing the same thing. Right. You should know, okay, who's, like if I'm an inventor or a car manufacturer or whatever it is, I want to know what Elon Musk is thinking, right? I may not like Elon Musk. I may think Elon Musk is the greatest guy in the world, but either way, I want to know what he's thinking because he's a thought leader. He's a guy who's, he's now currently the richest man in the world. I want to know what Warren Buffett's thinking. I want to know. There's a lot of things that I want to know in the world. Yeah. And I jokingly say, but Twitter is a really good place to keep up on a lot of that stuff without, having to go to the library constantly. Imagine going to the library. Yeah. Do you know anyone that goes to a library?
I don't know where my nearest library is. And
I know exactly where mine is, and I've never been in it because I can get all the internet. I mean, the internet is, I'm talking to you right now via the internet. This morning I was doing research. I was looking for, whatever on the internet, right? I can look for whatever I want on the internet anytime that I want. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's the first thing I do. I look at emails. I look at Twitter. I try to figure out, okay, what's going on in the world? What's happening in my space that I might be interested in reading about? And it's the same with whether it's podcasts or whether it's, subscribing to somebody's email feed. So you can look and think, okay, here are the people that I think are thought leaders, and I can be current. Today I bookmarked a couple of podcasts that I want to listen to, business kind of fitness, business related podcasts, so that I can keep up on what other successful fitness business people are going to be doing.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. Like there is just, these social platforms, it's funny. Like I'm constantly torn because on the one hand, it can very much be a time suck that's non-productive. So I often avoid it for that very reason, but you're absolutely right. Like well curated, there's no better access to like real-time information as to what, the best in the industry are thinking.
Right.
Well
Curated is the word. That's the key. The key is well curated, because it is a big time suck. You can look at TikToks forever of a bunch of idiots dancing. It's like who cares, right? I watched the same. I watched 1,000 different girls do the same dance on TikTok today, but that to me is a waste of time. But and even Instagram can be a little more of a waste of time because of where it's driven. Mm-hmm. Whereas Twitter, like I always think, I hate to say, a well-curated Twitter feed can really save you a lot of time. It can also be a time.
You're inspiring me to get back on Twitter.
Oh, if you're not, I would say, like, literally, I said to people, if you're not on Twitter, you're an idiot. Because it's so easy. It has to be. Sorry, I called you an idiot, right? But it has to be short, right? Whatever, 240 characters, folks. Whatever it is. But by its nature, it's brief, unless you decide to get sucked in. And then what you do on Twitter, the key on Twitter, and I learned this. I wish I could think who my friend was who told me, but somebody told me this, and I should give them credit. Muting and blocking, right? If idiots sort of invade your feed, you simply block them. Okay, I'm blocking this guy. He's an idiot. He's only here for the argument. I don't need him. Right. Or maybe I think he's only here for the argument, but he's actually kind of smart. I'm going to mute him. I generally block more than mute. If I look at people after a while and think, okay, these are just kind of turf defenders, then I'm going to block those people. And and then so I can literally, like, I curate my own feed. But then if you follow me on Twitter, you get the benefit of me curating my own feed, because now you follow me and then you see what I'm going to repost. Okay, what did I repost today?
Yeah.
Or what did I favorite? Or what did what discussion did I get involved in? And then you think, okay, I should probably go look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, that's part of the problem that people have too. And I've got a couple questions. So let me think about where I want to take this. But there's now so much information at folks' fingertips. It's very tough for the well-intended person to differentiate, like, the actual expert from the snake oil salesman. Working in this space for so long, and I wasn't planning on talking to you about this at all, but now I'm interested. For folks who are like, look, I really want to get better. I have a very specific goal. I don't know who to follow, who to invest my time and money in. Like, do you have any sort of like things that you recommend, criteria that people look for when assessing, whose information they're going to put validity into?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you my friend Alan Cosgrove's criteria. Been there, done that, still doing it. Okay. That's what you want to look for. Someone who's been there, someone who's done it, and someone who is still doing it. Because those are people with skin in the game and real world experience. The internet, you're right, absolutely freaking overpopulated with frauds, with fraudulent resumes. I mean, I always say in the fitness space, I could, call it names. I always said, like, at some point I'm going to get like my mother. When my mother kind of got old, she became like one of these people who just said whatever was coming into her mind. And sometimes I have to be like, Mom, like, relax on that. Okay. But I want to be that when I'm old, where someone will bring up a name and I'll be like, total fraud, like absolute loser. I can't believe you listened to him. But I can't do that. But when you look at, you look at people, here's my criteria. People who never post a video that's not like of them or their girlfriend or their mother, and the videos look like they're done in somebody's basement, but they swear, or they're in a garage and they swear they're one of the world's leading, performance enhancement specialists. And I'm like, okay, if you're one of the world's leading performance enhancement specialists, you are not filming videos in your freaking garage or your basement. Here I am filming a podcast in my basement, by the way. So just to state what a total fraud I am. But do you know what I mean? When you have to look at stuff like that, you have to look at their resume. When their resume is nebulous, people always, has trained numerous professional athletes, MLB, NHL, like they got all the league names, but no guys. Like you're like, okay, who are the guys? Like if you ask me who my guy, like I've trained the best women's ice hockey players in the world. I can tell you their names. Mm-hmm. Hillary Knight, Kendall Coyne, Megan Keller. I can go right down the list of the best women's ice hockey players in the world. I've trained most of them if they're American, right?
Yeah.
I trained the best women's lacrosse player in the world, Kayla Trainer. And if you look on my website, you'll see videos of Kayla Trainer training. I've trained some of the best NHL players in the world. I've trained literally guys that are in the Hall of Fame. And I could just look at the jerseys in our gym and you'll see the names of the people that we've trained. So we have been there and we have done that. I've got 2 national championship rings. I've got a World Series ring. I have the bona fides that you need to have to present myself as an expert in this field. But something, everybody's resume on the internet looks just like mine. Mike is one of the leading experts in performance enhancement in the world, a widely sought after speaker who's trained athletes from the NHL, NBA, MLB, whatever. Everybody's got the same bullshit resume. It's like they went to my website and copied mine off and just put it on theirs. And
I might just use that for your intro.
Yeah, some of those people, right, have probably met guys from those leagues in an elevator somewhere, or that guy stopped by their facility once because he was in the area. But so you have to really delve into the backgrounds of people and say, okay, if you say you train Olympians, who? And I always say this, if anybody says, I can't tell you, huge red flag. Because do you know how many clients I've ever had who said I couldn't mention their name? I'll give you a wild guess. How many?
I'm going to guess 1.
1. You're exactly right. I had 1.
Well, hey, all right.
When I was training Jennifer Garner, she didn't want people to know she was in Boston. She was like, please don't mention that I'm here. And this is the best part about Jennifer Garner, who is a doll. She said, I will make it up to you.
Yeah.
Do you know how Jennifer Garner made it up to me?
Awesome.
She talked about training with the BU hockey team on the freaking Jay Leno show. She literally Jay Leno was asking her how she got in shape for the movie. And she was like, oh my God, I trained with Mike Boyle at Boston University and all his BU players. And they were such great guys. I get a clip, I get the video clip in the morning from one of my friends. They're like, you won't believe this. And of course, I'm not up at 11. That's
amazing.
Yeah, I'm not up at 11:30 watching Jay Leno, right? But here I am when I tap on the clip, and here's Jennifer. Now, she was the only one who ever said, don't use my name. And she went on national TV and used my name. So my only point being, the guys who tell you they can't tell you who their clients are don't have any clients. And that's their way of covering it up. Like, oh yeah, I got a secret client list. If it got out, it could cause a lot of problems. I'm like, what problems would it cause? I don't understand what those problems would be. So I could write a book. I actually wrote an article one time on internet frauds. I can't think of what I actually think of what I actually called it, but it was exactly what we're talking about right now, because it's amazing how many of these people there are. They're everywhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and maybe let me ask you this to end, because, I even find myself in this camp. Like, look, I'm super passionate about these topics. I love it. I do it myself. I played college football. But I still, I'm like, could I write a good program? Like, probably not. Like, I understand what works for me. I understand the movements. If someone wrote something up, something that I enjoyed in your book was talking about, are you a cook or a chef? And how do you know when you become one or the other? So, for a lot of folks who listen are strength and conditioning coaches of all levels. Could you maybe just offer some perspective with regards to being a chef and a cook, and as it comes to actually writing programming versus implementing something that has been kind of, to use the word again, I guess, curated or put together by an expert?
Yeah. The article was called Stick to the Recipe. And one of the things that we talked about in the article is that training is a recipe. It's not a menu. And if we think of the concept of a recipe is very specific about the ingredients, the amount of ingredients, and the order of ingredients. If you change any of that, you risk screwing up the recipe, right? Training is identical, because it's not a matter of like, oh, I like this, I'm going to put twice as much of that in. You have to, like we always say, like, you look at everything as a pie chart and you figure out, okay, how much, when someone asks me, okay, write a program, first question, how much time do we have? And they're like, well, I'm like, no, you got to give me like, do we have an hour? Do we have an hour and a half? Do we have 2 hours? How many days a week do we have? What time of the year is it? Is this an in-season athlete, an off-season athlete? And so I think a lot of times you have to recognize, much like the culinary world, if you are a line cook, you do what the sous chef tells you, right? The sous chef says, cook me up this, and you cook it and you give it to him exactly the way that he told you to do it. You don't look at him and think, oh, I'm thinking I might do this. I might throw a little of this in. I might throw a little of that. And you're like, no, do exactly what I told you to do. You need to know that if that's, where are you on that scale? Like, are you a chef, sous chef, second in command, or are you a line cook? Most people are line cooks who think they're chefs. And most of the chefs behave like line cooks and, in the real world. So I always think the key, and I tell this to people all the time, the key to success in this field is, I always say at Mike Boyle University, the first class will be cheating. I will teach everybody how to cheat, because in strength and conditioning, everybody gives you the information. Like you can go on Train Heroic right now and download our programs. Might cost you, $20 or whatever, but you could say, I need a program for hockey. Okay, go to trainheroic.com and you'll get a program that has all the video clips on it. Everything will be done. And one of my coaches will chat with you online and answer your questions for you. Like, that's a pretty easy way to get a program. Or you could try to put it together yourself. And generally, you can tell I'm like an analogist, right? I love, one of my favorite quotes is, a giraffe is a horse made by a committee. And, right? But that's the way
I love a good saying. I've never heard that one in my life.
Well, write that one down so you make sure you use that again. But I want credit.
Yeah, man. I'm going to steal that one. Absolutely. You got it.
But when you think about, I say most people write giraffe programs when they mean to write horse programs. Because they can't, it's like, oh, I really like the long neck. I really like the long spindly legs. Whatever it is. It's like they inject so much of their likes into the program that when you look at the program, you're like, this stinks. Like, this is really bad. Whereas I say to people like, hey, I can tell you exactly write a program. Start with foam rolling, move to static stretching, put in some sort of, whatever, mobility activation, core training, do some type of dynamic warm-up, do some power exercises, do a strength program in which you push something, pull something, do some knee dominant unilateral exercise, do some hip dominant unilateral exercise, finish with some sort of interval conditioning. Okay, end of class, right? It's all over. All you got to do, fill in the blanks. And we literally, like, sometimes, we'll put like a worksheet together, and all you got to do is fill in, okay, upper push, what's my exercise? Upper pull, what's my exercise?
Right.
Knee dominant unilateral, what's my exercise? Hip dominant unilateral, what's my exercise? You know what I mean? It's like, it's not very hard to do, but then you look at someone else's program and you think, oh, you have 5 pushes. And they're like, yeah, but I like inclines and I like flies and I wanted to do some overheads. And you're like, okay, we gave you one block. You had to pick a push. That was your job. Don't tell me what you like to do. Don't tell me about like getting a good contraction of your pecs. Just freaking fill in the blank, you idiot, and go to the next thing. But people can't do that. They, you know what I mean? They in general, they can't get out of their own way when it comes to programming. They can't get past their own bias. And that's where it becomes problematic.
That makes total sense. And last question, I'm sneaking this one there only because you just brought it up. Okay. Conditioning. You do conditioning at the end of your workouts, even on like a strength-based day?
Yep, conditioning. Because again, if you think about our situation, our professional athletes are coming to us 4 times a week. I don't want to rely on them to do their conditioning on days they're not with me, because if you know most athletes, the thing they like to do least is conditioning. So if I said, hey, on Saturday, I would like you to do a really hard interval workout on the assault bike, I'm going to tell you that 20% of my guys are going to do a really hard interval on the assault bike, and 80% are going to golf and get their interval training. Maybe they'll carry their bag, right? So for us, conditioning is at the end of the workout. And we are not big conditioning people. Conditioning for us generally does not exceed 15 minutes. It is almost always entirely interval in nature. We do zero steady state conditioning, 0 distance running. Because again, the science does not support that very strongly.
Yeah, for sport. Well, that hour flew by. This has been awesome. So look, like I said, you have a lot of information available, but for folks who want to follow you, we already talked about your Twitter feed, which yes, I'm going to piggyback off your crew of experts. Where do you recommend that folks start by following you?
So I have a website called strengthcoach.com. Strengthcoach.com is a paid site. You pay to be a member, and we answer questions every day for every person's questions get answered every day. Brendan Rierick and Kevin Carr, two of the guys that I work with, we're on there. So I would say to somebody, that's the number one place to go. Twitter is easy. I'm at mboyle1959 on Twitter. I am at Michael_Boyle on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram too. I actually have more Instagram followers than Twitter followers. I just happen to like Twitter better. We do have programs on Train Heroic. We do have our own certification. And we got a lot of stuff going on. Our company website is bodybyboyle.com. We've just relaunched our Body by Boyle online website is MBSC TV. So we've got almost like where I said Netflix is going to sue us somewhere along the way, but we've said it's like a Netflix for trainers because, we've got something like 300 hours of video presentations. We have every one of our staff meetings. So that's at mbsctv.com. The bad part about us, my friend Anthony Renner always says, the guy that does Strength Coach podcast, he said, you have too many offerings and they compete with each other. And I'm like, yeah, we probably do, but I don't really care. The good thing is I'm in a good spot in life, so I'm not really that worried about it. I probably should be more organized and have a better feel for these things, but the reality is I don't.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. And like I said, I've had a ton of fun reading and watching your videos. And maybe we'll have to have you back on the future because I feel like I got through maybe 1/4 of my questions, but this was absolutely awesome, man. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.